The wind carved the gargantuan rock face, making it groan like a slumbering beast. For a mother and her children, it was their only home in the desert. But the mountain that threatened to crush them concealed a fortune that would change their lives forever. Anna's hand, still grimy with dust and sweat from the daily battle against the cracks of the Whispering Crag, hesitated. It wasn't just a deep fissure in the stone wall that formed part of their makeshift home. It was a crack that opened into darkness, a secret maw that time and wind had kept hidden. Cold, damp air escaped from that hole, a chilling contrast to the oppressive desert heat that enveloped her. Anna's heart pounded in her chest, a dull drum amidst the incessant howl of the wind lashing the colossal rock outside. She knelt, curiosity overriding the fear that always accompanied her. With an effort, she pushed aside the loose stones and accumulated sand that camouflaged the entrance, revealing a narrow, dark passage. The courage that propelled her each dawn to protect her children made her press on. She lit the small oil lamp she always carried and with bated breath crawled inside. The space was tight, the rough walls scraping against her shoulders as she advanced. The smell of damp earth and minerals filled the air, unlike the dry, dusty scent of the shack. The passage opened into a small chamber, not much larger than her children's makeshift sleeping area. The lamp's faint light danced across the walls, revealing irregular rock formations, and then something more, a gleam. First, a faint speck, almost imperceptible, embedded in the dark rock. Then, another, and another, and another. Thousands of them. Small points of white light twinkling with an intensity that seemed to defy the ancient darkness of the cave. Raw diamonds. They weren't polished or faceted, but undeniably diamonds, embedded in the rock matrix like fallen stars in a subterranean sky. The sight was so unexpected, so overwhelming, that Anna felt the air thin in her lungs. A low moan escaped her lips, muffled by the groaning wind outside, which now seemed a distant, ethereal chorus. She extended a trembling hand, touching the cold, rough surface of the rock. The diamonds were real, the rugged texture of the stone beneath her fingers, the coolness of the mineral. Warm tears streamed down her face, mixing with the dust and sweat. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a relief so profound it made her sway. The hunger, the fear, the humiliation, the hopelessness that had been her constant companion, all of it seemed to recede before that unexpected gleam. The Whispering Crag, the mountain that each day threatened to collapse upon them, the mountain that groaned and creaked like a hungry beast, had revealed itself as a guardian. The home that felt like a punishment perched above the abyss of misfortune was in fact a sanctuary, a secret vault that held her children's future. Anna knew she needed to act with caution. The wealth was immense, but also dangerous. No one could know. Her children, too young to understand the magnitude of the discovery, needed to be protected from the greed of the outside world. Carefully, she collected a small fragment of rock with a few embedded diamonds, feeling the weight of responsibility in her palm. It was a different kind of weight, a weight of hope. She crawled out of the cave, disguising the entrance again with loose stones and sand, trying to erase any trace of her passage. The wind howled outside, but now its sound seemed different to Anna, less threatening, more like a secret whispered between her and the mountain. She felt exhausted, but a new energy pulsed in her veins. The sun began to set, painting the desert with shades of orange and purple. Her children would soon call her for their meager supper. She needed to return, to act normally, but her mind already buzzed with plans. The first step would be to understand the exact value of those crystals and how to extract them from the mountain without attracting unwanted attention. The journey was just beginning, and the greatest challenge would not be finding the diamonds, but using them to forge a secure future for her family. Ina clutched the rock fragment with the diamonds against her chest as she crawled out of the secret crevice. The desert night air was already growing cool, and the wind's howl through the cracks of the Whispering Crag seemed more piercing than before, though now it carried a different tone for her. It was no longer just a lament of misfortune, but a whisper of a shared secret. She stood up, brushing the dust from her clothes, and tried to compose her expression before entering the shack. Her children, Pedro and Sofia, were already waiting for her. Their small faces illuminated by the flickering flame of the fire they kept lit to cook their usual thin porridge. "Mother, where were you?" Pedro the elder asked, his voice thick with hunger. Sofia, the younger, simply stretched out her little arms, reaching for a hug. Anna embraced them with renewed strength, the smell of their smoke and sweat mingling with hers. "I was just checking the walls, my loves. The Whispering Crag is singing loudly today." The lie slipped out easily, a new layer of protection she would have to build around them. As she fed them, she watched their sleepy faces, imagining the new clothes, the plentiful food, the security of a real home that those crystals could buy. The weight of the fragment in her pocket seemed to burn against her thigh, a constant reminder of the silent revolution that had just begun. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Anna sat by the fire, the oil lamp beside her. With trembling hands, she took out the fragment. The faint light made the diamonds sparkle, each one a silent promise. She knew what they were, but she didn't know their true value, nor how to turn them into something tangible without attracting the attention of dangerous people. The desert was vast and merciless, and its inhabitants often even more so. Greed was a beast she couldn't afford to awaken. The first task was the hardest: to learn. Anna had no books, no appraisal tools. The nearest town, a cluster of tents and adobe buildings days away, was a place she had avoided since the humiliation of her expulsion. There, the memory of her misfortune was still fresh, and the sight of her with any sign of wealth would be an invitation to ruin. She spent the next hours examining the diamonds, scraping one against another to test their hardness, observing how the light fractured on their irregular surfaces. She remembered ancient stories her grandfather used to tell about miners and precious stones, about the water of a diamond and its fire. They were vague memories, fragments of a distant past that now seemed crucial. The solution, she realized, would not come from outside, but from within, from the desert itself. There was an old man, a hermit who lived in the farthest dunes, a man known only as the Stone Sage. They said he had a deep knowledge of everything the earth concealed, and that his home was a library of rocks and minerals. No one dared to disturb him, except in cases of extreme necessity or despair. Anna knew that for her it was both. The journey would be dangerous, requiring days of walking under the relentless sun, and she couldn't take the children. She would have to leave them alone, a decision that clenched her heart, but one that was inevitable. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. The wind outside intensified, making the entire shack creak and groan. Grains of fine sand slipped through the cracks, forming small dunes on the floor. Anna looked at her sleeping children, then at the small fragment of wealth in her hand. The Whispering Crag continued to howl, but now, to Anna, it seemed to whisper a route, a path to the future she dared to dream. Morning would bring a new journey, a journey of hope and danger, where each step would be an advance towards an uncertain, but now, finally, possible destiny. The first light of dawn barely scratched the horizon, painting the desert sky in soft shades of pink and orange, when Anna rose. The air still carried the coolness of the night, but she knew the sun would soon transform the landscape into a merciless furnace. With silent movements, so as not to wake the children, she prepared what she could: an almost empty water skin, a handful of dried dates, and a piece of hard bread. The rock fragment with the diamonds, wrapped in a ragged cloth, was carefully tucked into an inner pocket of her tunic. close to her heart. Pedro and Sofia still slept deeply, their innocent faces serene in the flickering light of the dying embers. Anna knelt between them, her heart clenching in her chest. Leaving them alone, even for a few days, was torture. She kissed each of their foreheads, smelling the sweet scent of their hair. "My loves, Mama has to go." "It won't be for long," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Pedro, you're the man of the house now. Take care of your sister. Don't leave the shack, no matter what. There's water and a little food. I'll be back. I promise." Pedro stirred, his eyes slowly opening, still sleepy. "Mama, where are you going?" "I'm going to find something for us, my son, something that will change our lives," Anna replied, trying to sound confident. "But it's a secret, and you need to be strong and obedient. Please, Pedro." The boy, though small, felt the weight of responsibility. He nodded, a lump in his throat. Sofia, awakened by the conversation, began to whimper. Anna hugged her tightly, feeling the small hands cling to her clothes. "I'll be back, my love. Mama loves you," she promised, tears silently streaming down her face. With one last tight embrace, Anna disentangled herself from her children. Each step out of the shack was a stab to her soul, but the image of the diamonds in her pocket and the promise of a better future propelled her forward. The wind whistled through the cracks of the whispering crag, a lament that now sounded like a farewell. She began to walk as soon as the sun rose, turning the sand into a shimmering sea. The dunes stretched as far as the eye could see, undulating under the rising heat. There were no trails, only the immensity of the desert and the approximate direction her grandfather had described to find the stone sage. The heat punished her, making her throat dry and her skin burn. Every grain of sand lifted by the wind seemed to scratch her eyes and skin. Hours turned into an eternity. Thirst was a constant needle in her throat, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. The relentless sun beat down on her head, and the mirage danced on the horizon, mocking her exhaustion. She forced herself to continue, repeating the names of Pedro and Sofia like a mantra. With each step, the soft sand sank beneath her feet, making progress arduous. Her legs ached, her muscles protested, but her determination was stronger than any physical pain. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues, Anna spotted in the distance a rocky elevation that looked different from the others. It wasn't a dune, but a solid formation, almost like a small hill. It was there, she hoped, that she would find the hermit. Hope, long a stranger, rekindled in her chest. She staggered the last few meters, her vision blurred with exhaustion. As she approached, she realized that the rock was not a natural formation, but a camouflage structure almost merged with the landscape. Cracks and indentations formed what appeared to be a discreet entrance, protected by stacked stones. A faint scent of smoke and dried herbs hung in the air. Anna reached the entrance, her body trembling with fatigue. Her voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "Stone sage, I need your help." A heavy silence answered, broken only by the howling wind. She waited, her heart pounding. Then a deep, drawn-out voice, like the grinding of ancient stones, echoed from within the darkness. "Few come here, woman of the whispering crag, and those who come bring despair or greed. Which of them brought you to me?" Anna swallowed hard. "Both, sage, and something more. A hope." She took the rock fragment from her pocket, unfolding the cloth with trembling hands, revealing the diamonds that faintly shimmered in the twilight gloom. The ancient man heard the faint clink of the crystals as Anna unfolded the cloth. A heavy silence filled the shelter, broken only by the constant howl of the wind outside, which seemed to scratch the rocks with invisible claws. The sage's eyes, deep and dark as ancient wells, fixed on the diamonds. He did not immediately reach out, but leaned forward, his wrinkled face dipping into the gloom, watching the lamp's weak light refract on the irregular faces of the stones. "Water," he murmured, his grave voice more a whisper than a sound. "And fire. True wealth, woman, but also a curse if you know not how to tame it." Anna felt a shiver run down her spine, not from the cold, but from the authority in the old man's voice. "I seek no curse, sage. I seek a future for my children. I was cast out, humiliated. My husband died. I found these stones in the heart of the Whispering Crag where we live. They are our only hope, but I don't know what to do with them. I cannot return to the town. I cannot attract the wrong eyes. I need to know their value and how to turn them into security." Her voice, though tired, carried a desperate urgency. The sage cleared his throat, a dry sound that seemed to come from his dusty gullet. He finally extended a bony hand and took the rock fragment. His wrinkled fingers, stained by earth and time, airbrushed the rough surface of the rock and the cool smoothness of the diamonds. He turned them slowly, watching the reflections dance. "These are not just stones, woman of the Whispering Crag," he said, his eyes fixed on the crystals. "They are the promise of a life or an invitation to death. The value is immense, enough to buy a village or to seal your fate in a sandpit. But the question is not how much they are worth, but how much you are willing to pay for that information." Anna felt her heart clench. "I am willing to do anything to protect my children." The sage let out a hoarse chuckle, a sound like scraping the bottom of a barrel. "Easy words. Action is what weighs. Tell me, what is a man's greatest treasure?" Anna hesitated. "His family? His honor?" The old man shook his head slowly. "No, it is his secret, and you have a great secret. The desert has ears, woman, and the eyes of greed see far. To take these stones to the town is like lighting a bonfire in the middle of the night. Everyone will see, everyone will come." He placed the fragment back in Anna's hand, his piercing eyes meeting hers. "There is only one path for you. A path that demands patience, cunning, and sacrifice. You cannot sell these stones in their raw state. No one will pay their true value, and you will be cheated or worse. They need to be faceted, transformed, and for that you will need a gem cutter, a master, and these are even rarer than the diamonds you hold." The air inside the shelter seemed to grow denser. Anna felt a lump in her throat. "Where do I find someone like that, and how would I pay?" "There is a man," the sage began, his voice returning to an ancient murmur. "He lives in the eastern mountains, beyond the Valley of Shadows. A hermit like me, but with a talent for breathing life into stones. His name is Kale, but he does not work for gold or silver. He works for stories, for truths, and for something he calls the essence of the desert." Anna frowned. "The essence of the desert?" "Yes. He is a man of mysteries, but he is the only one who can do this for you without betraying you. He is a man of his word, but the journey to him is long and dangerous, more dangerous than the one you just made, and you cannot take all your stones, only one, the smallest, as proof. The rest must remain hidden." Anna's mind reeled. Another journey, farther, more dangerous, and leaving her children again. The wind's howl outside now sounded like a lament for her weary soul. "And what would be the essence of the desert for Kyle?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. The sage smiled, a slight movement at the corners of his dry lips. "That woman of the Whispering Crag is something you will have to discover for yourself. Each of us finds our own essence in this relentless place. But Kyle has a peculiar taste. He craves something most people try to forget." He leaned back, the movement causing a slight creak of bones. "You have a choice. Stay with your raw wealth and risk everything, or seek Kale and transform your destiny. But know that every step on this journey will be a test, a test of your faith, your courage, and your capacity for sacrifice. Anna looked at the fragment in her hand, the diamonds twinkling like tiny stars. The image of Pedro and Sofia's faces flooded her mind. The pain of separation was unbearable, but the promise of a secure life for them was a fire that burned hotter than the desert sun. "I will go," she declared, her voice firm, despite her exhaustion. "I will find Kale for my children." The sage nodded slowly. "Then the path is set. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, at the first ray of sun, head east. The Valley of Shadows is a labyrinth, but Kale lives near a rock formation that resembles an outstretched hand with 5 peaks. You will recognize it." Anna felt a mix of relief and dread. She had a plan, a name, a direction. But the path ahead seemed even more daunting. She huddled in the corner of the shelter, the diamond fragment still clutched in her hand. The wind outside continued to howl, but now Anna felt it was not just the desert speaking, but destiny itself, calling her to a new and dangerous journey. The night promised little sleep, only her mind racing with the dangers and promises of tomorrow. The night did not bring the promised sleep, but an incessant dance of shadows and fears in Anna's mind. Each howl of the wind against the shelter's rocks seemed to carry the names of Pedro and Sofia, a distant lament that clutched her heart. When the first rays of sun peeked through the cave's crevice, painting the sandy floor with shades of orange and purple, Anna was already awake, her body exhausted, but her mind sharpened by urgency. The stone sage, a slender, almost ethereal figure in the morning gloom, offered her a sip of fresh water from a leather water skin and a piece of dry bread. The simple gesture was a balm for her parched throat and stomach. She ate and drank in silence, feeling minimal energy return to her body. With trembling hands, she took the rock fragment from her pocket. The diamonds, once a promise of hope, now seemed a heavy burden. She chose the smallest of the crystals, a speck of light barely distinguishable in the rock, and carefully wrapped it in a piece of cloth the sage offered her. The rest she would hide upon returning to the Whispering Crag. "The path is to the east," the sage's voice was a hoarse whisper, "and the sun will be your guide. But the Valley of Shadows is treacherous. Do not get lost in the stone labyrinths. Trust your instincts and the light you carry within you." Anna nodded, the old man's words echoing in her soul. With one last look at the wrinkled figure, she turned and left the shelter. The desert stretched before her, a sea of sand and rocks under a sky that promised scorching heat. The wind, softer now, raised small clouds of sand that swirled and danced, whispering ancient secrets. She began to walk, the eastern direction as clear as the promise in her heart. The landscape gradually changed. Rolling dunes gave way to sharper rock formations, escarpments that rose like ancient ramparts, and narrow valleys that deepened into the earth. The ground became uneven, covered with loose stones and gravel that made each step difficult. With each passing hour, the sun climbed higher, relentless, and the heat intensified, making the sand shimmer and the air waver. Then she reached the Valley of Shadows. The name was no exaggeration. The valley was an intricate web of canyons and ravines where sunlight struggled to penetrate, creating a constant play of darkness and gloom. The rock walls, tall and imposing, cast deep shadows that moved and distorted with the passing hours, confusing her vision and disorienting her. The wind howled through the crevices, a ghostly sound that seemed to carry ancient voices and forgotten laments. Anna felt a shiver run down her spine. The silence, broken only by the wind and the echo of her own footsteps, was oppressive. She needed to stay focused, to remember her goal. Pedro, Sofia. The image of their faces was the beacon that guided her through the darkness and uncertainty. She forced herself to move forward, climbing small elevations, sliding down gravel slopes, and crawling through narrow passages. Thirst began to gnaw at her throat again, and exhaustion weighed on her limbs. At each turn, she hoped to see the rock formation the sage had described, an outstretched hand with 5 peaks. But the valley seemed endless, and each rock formation seemed to transform into another, mocking her quest. The sun began to dip to the west, and the shadows in the valley lengthened, becoming even denser and more menacing. The air grew colder, and Anna felt despair begin to tighten its grip. Had she gotten lost? Was Kale just a legend, and her journey a cruel deception? Just as hope began to wane, when her knees threatened to give way and her vision blurred with fatigue, she looked up at the horizon. Above the valley walls, where the sky still held a reddish glow from the sunset, an unmistakable silhouette stood out. It was not a mirage. It was a colossal rock formation with 5 distinct peaks that jutted into the sky, like giant fingers of an outstretched hand offering a silent invitation. A wave of relief and renewed determination washed over Anna. She was not lost. Kyle was near. With the last of her strength, she dragged herself out of the Valley of Shadows towards that miraculous sight. As she approached, she noticed that the base of the hand was dotted with small caves and crevices, some with signs of occupation. A faint scent of smoke and burning wood hung in the air, different from the sage's herbal smell, but equally comforting. She reached the base of the rock formation, her body trembling with fatigue, but her heart beating with new hope. There was a more prominent entrance, a natural arch in the rock, where a fire crackled softly, casting dancing lights into the darkness. A figure sat by the fire, hunched over something, engrossed in his work. "Kyle?" Anna's voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible, but the figure slowly straightened, turning to her. The man's eyes, deep and penetrating, fixed on her, and Anna felt her entire soul was being read in that instant. Kyle's eyes, deep as dark, ancient wells, were a window to a wisdom Anna could barely comprehend. There was no hostility in them, no surprise, only a piercing stillness that seemed to strip her soul bare, revealing every layer of weariness and despair. The man was thin, with wrinkles etched by sun and wind, and his hands, though strong, had the delicacy of one who wields tools with precision. He raised an eyebrow, a subtle movement that was his only response to her arrival. "Kale?" Anna repeated, her voice still hoarse, but with a new urgency. "The stone sage sent me. I came from afar, from the Whispering Crag." Kale did not respond immediately. His eyes scanned Anna's body, noting the dust that covered her clothes, the scratches on her hands, the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. He moved one hand towards the fire, and the scent of dried herbs and pine resin intensified. "The sage still sends lost souls to me." Kyle's voice was a grave whisper, like the sound of stones tumbling in a dry riverbed. He did not invite her to sit, nor offer water. He simply waited. Anna, despite the fatigue that made her sway, knew this was not a man for idle chatter. She extended her hand, revealing the small cloth package. With trembling hands, she unfolded it, revealing the raw diamond, small but glittering, that she had brought as proof. The firelight danced on its facets, revealing a contained brilliance. Kyle's eyes fixed on the stone. He leaned forward, picking it up with 2 fingers. His thumbs, rough and calloused, brushed the crystal's coarse surface. He turned it, observing it from all angles, not with the greed of a merchant, but with the reverence of an artist. "Interesting," he murmured, the word more to himself than to her. "A stone with potential. But you know I do not work for stones." He returned it to Anna, who held it as if it were a fragment of her own hope. "I know," Anna said, her voice firmer now. "The sage said you work for stories, for truths, and for the essence of the desert." Kyle let out a sound that could have been a sigh or a faint chuckle, a dry rustle like shifting sand. "The essence of the desert," he repeated, his eyes fixed on hers. "Yes, many come to me with stories, with truths they believe to be profound, But few understand the essence. The true essence of the desert is not the beauty of the dunes, nor the resilience of the acacias. It is the memory of what was lost, what was torn away, the scar that time cannot erase. It is that which most try to bury, forget, pretend never existed. Anna felt a shiver. The sage's words echoed in her mind. He craves something most people try to forget. That something was not a tangible thing, but a wound of the soul. I lost much, Anna began, her voice thick with emotion. My husband, my home. I was cast out, humiliated. I was forced to live in a precarious shack at the base of the Whispering Crag, with my small children fighting against hunger and the relentless wilderness. With each word, the pain she had tried to suppress resurfaced, raw and palpable. Kyle nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. That is a story, a truth, but the essence is not the event itself, woman of the Whispering Crag. It is what remained afterward, what you felt when the world collapsed, the smell of the dust, the taste of humiliation, the sound of silence when hope was gone. That which you try not to think, not to feel in order to move forward. Anna swallowed hard. He was asking her to relive the deepest abyss of her soul. That moment when she found herself alone, with two hungry children, homeless, without a future, with the scornful gaze of those who had cast her out etched in her memory. The shame, the despair, the paralyzing fear. When they threw us out, Anna began, her voice now a thin thread, and I saw Pedro's face, so small, so confused. I felt like I was dying inside, not from the loss of the house, but from the loss of dignity, from the feeling that I was no longer capable of protecting my children, that I had failed, and the worst part. She paused, her throat tight, tears threatening to fall. The worst part was the certainty that there was no one to help us. The loneliness, the abandonment, that emptiness, an emptiness that the desert seemed to reflect. Kyle closed his eyes for an instant, an almost imperceptible movement. When he opened them again, there was a different intensity in his gaze. The loneliness, the abandonment, the emptiness. Yes, that is the essence of the desert, the truth that the wind whispers when there is no one left to hear. He leaned to the side, picking up a small hammer and a chisel from a pile of tools beside him. Give me the stone, Anna of the Whispering Crag. Your story, your truth, your essence. They are the payment I seek, but the faceting is a slow process. It demands more than just a beginning. It demands that you continue to feed me with that truth each time I need inspiration, each time the stone demands more from me and from you. Anna felt an overwhelming relief mixed with a cold dread. He had accepted, but the price. The price was to relive her pain, to unearth her scars again and again. She extended her hand, giving the small diamond to Kyle. He took it with the care of one holding a newborn, and his fingers began to work, preparing the stone for the transformation to come. The soft sound of the chisel scraping the rock filled the night's silence, a sound that promised a new beginning, but also a continuous journey through Anna's most painful memories. She knew that the true faceting wouldn't just be of the stone, but of her own soul. The soft sound of the chisel scraping the rock filled the night's silence, a hypnotic rhythm that Kyle maintained with an almost ritualistic dedication. The muscles of his arms were tense beneath his sun-marked skin, but the movements of his hands were of an almost supernatural precision. Anna watched him, seated on the other side of the fire, feeling the heat of the flames fight against the cold rising from the desert floor. Exhaustion still enveloped her like a heavy cloak, but the tension in her chest, the anticipation, kept her awake. Hours passed, marked only by the dwindling firewood and the incessant tick-tick-tick of the chisel against the raw diamond. Kyle did not speak, did not look at her. He was completely immersed in his work, a fusion of concentration and reverence that Anna had never before witnessed. Anna, in turn, was immersed in her own memories, Kyle's words echoing in her mind. That which you try not to think, not to feel, in order to move forward. With each strike of the chisel, a small sliver of stone broke off, falling softly onto the dark cloth Kyle had spread. The diamond, still mostly opaque, began to reveal a form, a promise. Anna felt a strange connection between the stone and her own soul. Both were being faceted, stripped of their roughest, most imperfect layers. The sky began to lighten in the east, painting the horizon with shades of purple and orange. The cold pre-dawn wind brought with it the smell of damp sand and the promise of a new day. Kyle finally stopped, raising the diamond to the faint light that was beginning to invade the cave. He turned it slowly, and Anna could see a small, polished facet, shining with a pale, promising gleam. A sigh escaped Kyle's lips, a sound so soft it almost got lost in the rustle of the wind. He carefully set the stone down and turned to Anna. His eyes, previously fixed on the diamond, now stared at her with the same intensity as the night before. "The stone has begun to yield," he said, his voice hoarse with fatigue, but with a tone of contained satisfaction. "But the next stage demands more. More than the pain of abandonment, more than the shame of humiliation. It demands the root of your fear." Anna felt a lump tighten in her throat. She thought she had already given everything, but the root of fear, it was something even deeper, more primal. "The fear of failing," she murmured, almost to herself. "The fear of not being enough for them, for Pedro and Sofia." Kyle nodded slowly. "The desert teaches that life is a thin thread, that survival is a constant dance with loss. But the greatest fear is not loss itself. It is the inability to protect what remains, impotence. Tell me about it, woman of the whispering crag. Tell me about the darkest night that fear consumed you." Anna closed her eyes, and the image of that night projected into her mind with painful clarity. The night the first great sandstorm hit the Whispering Crag, shortly after they had moved into the shack. "It was a week after we arrived," she began, her voice trembling. "The sun had set and the sky was clear, but suddenly the wind began to howl, a lament that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth. The Whispering Crag groaned, and the sand began to lash the shack with the force of 1,000 whips. She could smell the fine sand, the salty taste in her mouth, the pressure of the wind against the makeshift walls. My children were sleeping. I had wrapped them in blankets, trying to protect them from the cold that seeped through the cracks. But the noise was deafening. The wind roared like a furious beast, and I could hear the stones and sand scraping against the rock, as if the monolith was being sanded to the bone. I feared that at any moment the shack would collapse, that the rock itself would split open above us." A tear streamed down her face, warm and salty. "I remember holding Pedro and Sofia, their small bodies trembling in my arms. I whispered lullabies, prayers, anything that could drown out the sound of the wind and my own wildly beating heart. I had nowhere to go. There was no shelter. I was just a mother, powerless, watching nature threaten to take all that remained. Despair was a physical weight, crushing my chest. I smelled death in the air, and the bitter taste of defeat in my mouth." She opened her eyes, staring at Kyle. The pain was visible on her face, but also a fierce resilience. Kyle listened in silence, his eyes fixed on hers. He did not interrupt her, did not show pity. He simply absorbed every word, every emotion. "The smell of death in the air," he repeated, his voice a grave murmur. "The bitter taste of defeat, impotence. Yes, that is the root. The true essence of the desert is not just loss, but the paralyzing fear of losing what cannot be protected. The despair of knowing that sometimes there is nothing one can do." He picked up the diamond again. That truth has the power to break the hardest barriers, to reveal the deepest light. Kyle returned to his work, and the tick, tick, tick of the chisel resumed, more determined now, more focused. Anna watched him, feeling a strange relief mixed with emotional exhaustion. Telling Kyle was like emptying a well of murky waters in her soul, allowing the sunlight to reach the bottom. She knew there were still many layers to be unraveled, many truths to be shared, but with each revelation, a small part of her burden seemed to diminish. The diamond in Kyle's hands and Anna's soul were in a painful yet necessary process of transformation. The light of dawn filled the cave, and with it a new, albeit fragile, hope. The light of dawn continued its quiet invasion, painting the rough walls of the cave with a soft, shifting glow. Kyle, hunched over his work, seemed oblivious to the changing light, his concentration unwavering. The steady rhythm of the tick-tick-tick of the chisel against the diamond was the only sound breaking the desert's morning silence, a sound that had now become as familiar and constant as the beat of Anna's own heart. Small, glittering fragments continued to fall onto the dark cloth, each a testament to Kyle's skill and Anna's painful honesty. The diamond, once a dull, ungraceful protrusion, now possessed a nascent glow, a promise of the fire that pulsed within it. More facets were emerging, catching the light and scattering it in tiny, hesitant rainbows across the stone. Anna watched, her body aching from the long night, her mind a maelstrom of revived memories. She felt lighter, yes, as if a heavy shroud of grief had been partially lifted, but also raw, exposed. The catharsis was real, even if it left her vulnerable. She glanced at where Pedro and Sofia slept, nestled against each other, their innocent breathing a balm for her restless spirit. They were her anchor, her reason. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the cave floor, Kyle paused. He raised the diamond, turning it slowly, allowing the full force of the morning light to strike its newly formed surfaces. A sigh, deeper than the last, escaped him, a sound of deep contemplation. He turned to Anna, his eyes piercing her exhaustion. "The stone breathes now," he said, his voice softer, almost reverent. "The light begins to dance in its heart, but to unleash its true song, for it to sing with the voice of the desert, I need more. I need the essence of your surprise, of that moment when despair collided with hope. The turning point, Anna of the Whispering Crag, the moment the desert revealed its deepest secret to you." Anna felt a chill. The surprise, the discovery. It was the secret she guarded most fiercely, the only thing that distinguished her from all the other lost souls in the desert. To reveal that, it was almost like surrendering the very source of her new life. But she knew, deep down, that Kyle would not leave her in peace until she did. "It was when I was trying to seal the crack," she began, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if she feared the cave walls might hear. "That fissure that opened in the stone wall of the shack, letting in the wind and sand. I was exhausted, my hands raw from trying to fill the cracks with mud and stones. The Whispering Crag groaned incessantly, and I felt that each day the rock became more and more a prison, not a shelter. I was pushing a larger stone into the crack when it gave way. Not the crack, but the wall itself. A piece of the rock broke off, revealing not solid rock, but a dark void. The air that came out was damp and cold, unlike the dry desert air. I remember the feeling of nothing, that there was nothing left to lose. So with a piece of wood I dug. The earth was soft, and the rock behind it, fragile. And then the hole opened. A small, camouflaged entrance. I slipped inside into the dark, my heart pounding like a drum. The smell of wet earth and minerals filled the air. I had no light, but something gleamed in the darkness, a faint, almost imperceptible glow. I reached out and my fingers touched something cold and smooth. I pulled it out, and even in the gloom I could see small, transparent stones, reflecting the little light that came from the opening, raw diamonds. It wasn't joy, Kyle. Not immediately. It was a shock so profound it paralyzed me. I thought I was dreaming, or that loneliness had driven me mad. I remember laughing, a hysterical, soundless laughter as tears streamed down my face, tears of disbelief, of relief, of a new and terrible fear. The fear that it wasn't real, or that, if it was, it would be taken from me like everything else. The fear that by finding such a treasure, I would attract the attention of all the desert's evils. That gleam. It was a promise, yes, but also a burden as heavy as the rock that sheltered us. Kyle listened, the same intensity in his eyes, but now with a gleam of understanding, almost recognition. He nodded slowly. The shock, the disbelief, the hysterical laughter on the brink of madness, the burden of the promise. Yes, that is the desert's surprise. It takes everything, and then, when you expect nothing more, it offers the unthinkable. But the offer comes with its own weight, doesn't it? The responsibility, the secret, the fear of losing what has just been found. He picked up the diamond again, his fingers moving with a renewed urgency. The sound of the chisel resumed, firmer, more confident. Now, each strike seemed to release not just a sliver of stone, but a particle of Anna's soul, allowing the light, once imprisoned, to radiate with greater strength. Anna watched, feeling the weight of the secret diminish a little more, replaced by a strange sense of sharing. Kyle did not judge her, merely received her truth, transforming it into something tangible, into light. The diamond in his hands was no longer just a stone. It was the story of her life, faceted drop by drop, tear by tear, fear by fear, hope by hope. The sun, now high in the sky, bathed the cave in a golden light, revealing the diamond's growing brilliance, a beacon of resilience and rebirth. The golden light of the high sun now filled the cave, dancing across the diamond's newly cut facets. Each precise strike of Kyle's chisel echoed through the space, a rhythmic testament to his skill and Anna's raw honesty. The stone, once an opaque chunk, now radiated a nascent fire, a promise of hidden depths. Small, almost imperceptible rainbows shimmered on its surface, catching the light and scattering it across the rough walls. Anna watched, her body still heavy with the recounting of her past, but her spirit felt a strange and fragile lightness. The weight of the secret, though shared, still oppressed her, a constant whisper of danger. Kyle paused again, his movements fluid and deliberate. He raised the diamond, turning it slowly, his gaze piercing its core before meeting Anna's. His eyes, deep and ancient, seemed to see beyond the stone, into the very essence of her being. "The light is breaking free," he said, his voice a grave murmur that seemed to echo from the depths of the cave. "The stone begins to sing, but its melody is still a lament. I need the essence of your silent courage, Anna of the Whispering Crag, of that moment when the fear of the treasure transformed into the strength to protect it. The weight of choice, the first step to turn the burden into hope." Anna felt a lump in her throat. Silent courage. Yes. After the shock and the hysterical laughter came paralysis, and then the need to act. I remember dragging myself out of that crevice, the raw diamond still clutched in my trembling hand, she began, her voice low, almost a secret shared only with Kyle and the stone walls. The sun was already setting, and the shadows lengthened, transforming the Whispering Crag into a menacing silhouette against the orange sky. I knew I couldn't leave the entrance open. The wind, the sand, the animals, and worse still, the men of the desert. That secret would be my ruin if it were discovered. I spent the rest of the night and the following day sealing the entrance. I used the same stones and mud I used for the shack's cracks, but with a feverish precision. Each stone was placed with obsessive care, each layer of mud smoothed to camouflage any sign that something had been disturbed. My hands were raw, but adrenaline propelled me. I couldn't stop. Sweat streamed down my face, mixing with the dust, and the smell of wet earth and minerals clung to my clothes. I felt the desert's gaze on me. With each creak of the wind, each rustle of dry bush, I turned, expecting to see someone, something. Pedro and Sofia grew. Their faces, once thin and marked by hunger, now glowed with health. They had decent clothes, plentiful food, and even some books I managed to trade for. Seeing them smile, hearing them laugh as they played, was my fuel. But it was also my greatest vulnerability. I lived with the constant fear that an innocent word, a toy too new, could attract attention. I taught them to be discreet, not to talk about gifts or trips. They were children, but the weight of the secret hung over us like a cloud. A dry, sharp sound made Anna flinch. It was the wind, lashing the face of the Whispering Crag, tearing off grains of sand that scraped against the shack's outer rock. The cave trembled slightly, a vivid reminder of the fragility of her refuge. The Whispering Crag was my accomplice and my tormentor. Its cracks and grottos hid the entrance, but its groans and the cracking of the rock reminded me every instant of the precariousness of everything. I spent sleepless nights listening to the wind howl, imagining stones breaking loose, revealing our secret to the world. Exhaustion was a constant companion. My muscles ached. My mind never rested, but the image of my children, sleeping peacefully, was the shield that kept me from collapsing. I couldn't afford to be tired, to be afraid. I was the guardian. Kyle nodded, his eyes fixed on Anna, absorbing every word. The diamond in his hand seemed to pulse, accompanying the rhythm of the narrative. He raised the chisel, its sharp tip glinting in the golden light. With a movement that seemed a natural extension of his listening, he delivered a precise strike. A sharp crack filled the cave, louder than the wind outside, and a larger sliver broke off, revealing a new facet. The diamond now radiated a more intense, almost blinding light, and the melody Anna felt in her chest became more audible, a song that spoke of resilience, of a strength that would not bend, even under the crushing weight of time and danger. The light in the cave did not just dance. It now seemed to breathe, pulsing with the energy of the stone and Anna's soul, which revealed itself in its fullness. The light in the cave, already breathing with the energy of the stone and Anna's revealed soul, intensified further. The diamond, now radiating a brilliance that seemed to paint the very air with golden hues, hummed with a melody that was not only audible but felt, reverberating through the stone floor and up Anna's bones. Kyle held the gem, turning it slowly, his gaze unwavering, as if reading the story etched into its facets. The stone now sings with the voice of resilience. "Anna of the Whispering Crag," Kyle said, his voice so low it seemed to emerge from the rock itself. "But the fullness I feel in it, and in you, goes beyond mere survival. Unwavering vigilance kept the secret. Resistance protected the flame. But how does one live under the shadow of such a colossal secret day after day, year after year, without the soul bending under the weight? How did you find peace in the storm, acceptance, and perhaps even a new kind of love for this place that was your tormentor and your sanctuary?" Anna closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the diamond's hum in her chest, an answer that was already there, waiting to be articulated. Kyle's question touched a deep chord, the essence of how she had not merely survived, but flourished. She opened her eyes and a soft smile, tinged with melancholy and triumph, played on her lips. "Peace in the storm," she repeated, the phrase hanging in the air. It wasn't a switch that flipped Kyle. It was a slow process, like water that drips and shapes stone over ages. In the beginning, the Whispering Crag was my enemy. Its groans were laments, its cracks, threats. But with time, it became my protector, my silent confidant. The winds that once terrified me now seemed like lullabies, cradling my children while I worked in the cave. She gestured to the stone walls. Every crevice I sealed, every crack I repaired in the shack, was no longer an act of desperation, but of care. The sweat that streamed down my face was not just from exhaustion, but from a renewed purpose. I learned to read the desert, to predict sandstorms by the smell in the air, to find water in places others would never look. The Whispering Crag taught me to be a part of it, to merge with its harshness and its brutal beauty. A soft sound of laughter, born from her own memories, escaped her lips. Pedro and Sofia, they were the key. Seeing them grow strong and healthy, free from the hunger and fear I had known, was my greatest reward. Their laughter echoed in the shack, and the wind seemed to carry it away, as if the desert itself celebrated their joy. I watched them play in the dunes, their small, agile bodies, and realized that fear, though it never completely disappeared, had been eclipsed by the happiness I could give them. Anna looked at the diamond in Kyle's hands, and then at the vein of raw diamonds still untouched in the wall. The treasure wasn't just the stones, Kyle. It was the life they allowed us to build. It was the dignity I had regained, the strength I had discovered within myself. I was no longer the humiliated widow, cast out of her home. I was Anna of the Whispering Crag, guardian of a secret and builder of a future. I learned to love the solitude of the desert, the stillness of the starry nights, the relentless heat of the sun. Every element that once seemed a torture now was part of my existence, part of my story. A loud, sudden crack coming from outside the cave made Anna start. It wasn't the wind nor the groan of the rock. It sounded like something heavy breaking loose. Perhaps an avalanche of sand or small stones. The cave floor trembled more perceptibly this time, and a fine sandstone dust floated in the air. Anna felt a shiver, a vivid reminder of the fragility of her world, even amidst her newfound peace. Kyle, unperturbed, kept his gaze fixed on the diamond. "The acceptance of the storm," he murmured, his voice resonating with the stone's vibration. He raised the chisel, its silvered tip catching the intense light emanating from the diamond. With a movement that was neither fast nor slow, but charged with deep intention, he delivered a final strike. A crystalline, pure, and resonant sound filled the cave, like the chime of a glass bell. A perfect shard of flawless clarity broke off the main diamond. The stone now shone with a light so pure and intense that it seemed to have absorbed all the heat and light of the desert, and the melody Anna felt in her chest transformed into a chorus, a hymn of triumph and a deep, unshakable peace, forged in the furnace of adversity. The air in the cave hummed with the energy, and Anna felt as if every cell of her body vibrated in tune with the stone, her own soul now as faceted and brilliant as the diamond taking shape. The hum of the cave, once a melody of triumph, now mingled with a growing roar from outside, a sound of friction and detachment that swallowed the air. The ground trembled again, with a violence that made small stones break loose from the cave ceiling and fall to the floor with dry clicks. The sandstone dust thickened, dancing in the intense emanations of the diamond. Anna, her heart racing, turned sharply to the camouflaged entrance, her eyes fixed on the crevice that led to the shack. A sharp, childish, terrified scream cut through the growing roar from outside. It was Sofia's voice. The hymn of peace in her chest shattered, replaced by a wave of primal terror. It was not fear for herself, but the icy panic only a mother can feel upon hearing her child's pain. The fragility of the whispering crag, which she had learned to accept, now manifested as an imminent and devastating threat. The monolith, her accomplice and protector, was rebelling. Kale, still holding the facetted diamond, looked up at Anna. His deep eyes showed no surprise, only a serene understanding. "The storm, inner of the whispering crag," he said, his calm voice cutting through the rising din. "It not only shapes the stone, but reveals the true strength of what has been forged in your heart." He extended his hand, offering the perfect shard of the diamond. The stone pulsed with a light that seemed to concentrate all the resilience Anna had described. Without hesitation, Anna took the diamond. Its surface was cold and smooth, but an ardent energy seemed to radiate from within, infusing her palm. The stone's song, which had been a gentle hymn, now sounded like a war drum in her chest, a call to action. The dust and tremor intensified, and the sound of something large dragging and collapsing outside became deafening. Sophia's scream repeated, this time muffled by a colossal roar that shook the very foundation of the whispering crag. Anna did not think. There was no time for deliberation, only for instinct. The peace she had found was not the absence of danger, but the ability to face it. The love for her children, the purpose that had driven her for years, now crystallized into a single urgent need. She spun on her heels, the diamond shard clutched in her hand, and ran to the secret entrance, the roar of the whispering crag swallowing the sound of her hurried footsteps. The cave, her sanctuary of secrets and revelations, was left behind, as the Guardian plunged back into the desert's fury, into the heart of the storm that threatened to collapse upon everything she had built. Anna burst through the camouflaged crevice, the air of the shack hitting her like a punch. It was not the safe haven she had left moments before. The interior was enveloped in a dense cloud of sandstone dust, and the sound of the whispering crag crumbling was a guttural roar that seemed to come from within the earth itself. The makeshift walls of canvas and wood groaned and creaked, and cracks opened in the rock that formed the back of the shack, releasing more sand and small stones that fell to the floor with a dry sound. Sophia and Pedro were huddled in the farthest corner, their faces streaked with dust and tears, eyes wide with terror. Sophia's scream mingled with the noise, a sharp wail of fear. "Mama!" Pedro cried, reaching out to her. Anna felt her heart clench, but there was no room for panic. The diamond shard in her palm seemed to burn, its energy pulsing in sync with the frantic beat of her heart. The peace she had found was not the absence of chaos, but the ability to act within it. She threw herself to her children, embracing them tightly. The ground trembled again with a violence that made her fall to her knees. A section of the sandstone wall, where there had once been a crack she had sealed with such care, collapsed with a crash, revealing the grey, stormy sky outside. The wind howled, lashing sand into the shack. "Out! We have to get out!" Anna screamed, her voice almost inaudible over the clamor of the rock. She grabbed Pedro and Sophia's hands. "Run! Out the front!" They had barely taken a few steps when Kale emerged from the cave's crevice, his face calm and unshakable amidst the pandemonium. He carried no chisel, but his eyes were fixed on Anna, a gleam of knowledge in them. "The Whispering Crag opens. Anna of the Whispering Crag," he said, his voice strangely clear above the din. "Not to destroy, but to reveal a new path." Before Anna could question, an even more powerful tremor shook the shack. The canvas roof tore with a snap, and an avalanche of stones and sand descended upon the structure, ripping away the walls and dismantling everything Anna had built. The bench where they ate, the small table, the makeshift beds, everything was swallowed by the rock's fury. Anna pulled her children out to what remained of the front of the shack, now a pile of rubble. The monolith above them groaned, and large blocks of sandstone broke loose, tumbling down the slope with a sound like thunder. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The Whispering Crag, which for so long had been her tormentor and her sanctuary, was now in its final act of transformation. Kyle pointed to a newly opened crevice at the base of the rock, a dark tear in the sandstone from which came not the sound of collapse, but a constant flow of fresh air. "Through there," he said, his voice urgent for the first time. "It's the way out. The Whispering Crag sets you free." Anna did not hesitate. She trusted Kyle, trusted her instinct. Holding her children's hands tightly, she ran to the crevice, the diamond in her hand pulsing with a soft light, like a beacon in the growing darkness. The air inside was cool and surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the chaos they left behind. They crawled through a narrow, winding tunnel, the sound of the Whispering Crag collapsing, gradually diminishing behind them. Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, they emerged into a landscape Anna had never seen. It was not the arid, familiar desert. They were in a small depression, sheltered by gentle dunes, and in the distance, a line of green shrubs and even a few trees, indicating the presence of water. The sky was breaking open, and a ray of sun pierced the clouds, illuminating the scene. The Whispering Crag in the distance seemed smaller, its colossal form now altered, some parts crumbled, but still imposing. The shack, Anna knew, had been completely swallowed, but they were alive, and the diamond in her hand still shone. Kyle joined them, his gaze sweeping the new landscape with silent satisfaction. "The Whispering Crag did not abandon you," he said. "It delivered you to a new beginning. The true inheritance is not just the stones, Anna. It is the freedom they bring and the wisdom you acquired. Peace in the storm is not the absence of danger, but the courage to face it and the resilience to flourish afterward." Anna looked at her children, who now observed the new landscape with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Their faces were still streaked with dust, but their eyes no longer showed terror, only the promise of a new day. She squeezed the diamond in her hand, feeling the warmth and strength that emanated from it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "freedom and courage." Poetic justice was not vengeance against those who had humiliated her, but the building of a future as vast and brilliant as the star-strewn desert, a future forged in rock, yet free from its shadows. The Whispering Crag had fulfilled its purpose, revealing not only a hidden treasure, but the unshakable strength of a mother. And now, Anna of the Whispering Crag, with her children and the unmistakable gleam of the diamond in her hand, was ready to write the next chapters of her story, under a sky that promised not only peace, but a limitless horizon.